Hey folks, welcome to a session on writing clean code. Today's agenda will talk about 15 code smells and heuristics. I see some comments in the chat already. We have someone who is a UI developer with 4 years of experience. I see someone with 5 years experience, mostly front end. All right, cool. I see someone fresher is a fresher as well. Yeah, I think uh, it's more tailored to someone who has already written a lot of code. But if you're just starting out, also you can just pick up good practices at the beginning itself. So let's start. Here is a meme just to sort of help you realize what good code or bad code looks like. Everything is measured when someone is doing a code review of your code. If your code review goes smoothly, that means you're writing a good code. Otherwise, you'll get like 10, 20 comments, and your reviewer is like, okay, what have you written? So that's the real measurement of code quality. Let's start with the agenda. These are topics we'll cover. So we'll see 4 plus 2, comments, environment, functions, plus 3 plus 4. So names and tests. So 15 things we'll cover. Let's start with the first one. It's going to be an interactive session. So we'll see first bad code and then we'll see what a better code looks like. So feel free to comment. So let's start with the first code smell, which is inappropriate information. So if you see in this function, uh, like you can also like keep putting in the chat what you find wrong in this, but just by looking at it, it's mentioning who it is edited or written by. So it says written by me, Swapnil, uh, as well as the date. So this information is not really useful. This is something that your version control system takes care of. If you're using something like Git is the tool. If you're using any platform like GitHub or GitLab, that particular thing will take care of of this. Then again, saying this function is so cool that really doesn't explain why it's cool or what the function does. Note that there's a to-do comment. To-do comments are usually fine, but this one is a pretty vague comment. It doesn't explain what a fancier algorithm means. So this is like, in total, this is inappropriate information. What you can do is just clean it up. It just adds two numbers and returns the results. Feel free to ask any questions or just drop any whatever you're thinking, feeling in the chat anytime. Because like I said, it's going to be a quick review of these 15 things. So we'll go a bit fast. Let's talk about the second code smell, which is an obsolete comment. So uh, let's spend a few seconds on reading this function and put it in the put just comment below what do you feel is the issue here. There's a function definition get user, it takes in user ID, and then it returns database.fetch user by ID, user ID. All right. But if you see the comment at the top, the comment says that the function retrieves the user by user name. But if you see down, it clearly retrieves it by user ID. So the code doesn't match what the function actually does. And if another developer just reads the first comment, it doesn't, he or she, doesn't go into the details and reads the whole function. So here, of course, for clarity, there's just one line in the function. This function could be like, 20 lines long, right? And if your top function comment is not matching what the function is actually doing, that is a code smell, or like it's bad code basically. And specifically, it's okay when you are the only person working on that code base, but usually we are working in a team, and if another developer reads this, just they might just use this function incorrectly. Just they could think that it works for usernames. So uh, what's the fix? We just update the comment to the relevant functionality. This function retrieves a user by their ID from the database. All right. Um, if you have a doubt anytime, just like put it in the chat. If you're able to hear me, just give a quick yes in the chat. So I know you are with me till now. If you want me to go slower, faster, same pace, just mention in the chat as well. Quickly, just write quick, faster, or slower, or same pace. Just one word. Okay, I see yes, yes, yes. All okay. All right, perfect. Let's move to the next one, which is redundant comment. So we saw the previous two things, but if you look closely, the comment is not really adding a lot of value. The function name, it says add, and the comment also says it just adds and returns the result. Same thing for the next function as well. It says retrieves the user, which is synonymous with get user by their ID. So there's only one argument there that you're passing in the function, which is user ID. So it's pretty much redundant, right? And how do you fix this? You just remove the comments altogether. So that is uh like usually you see a lot of advice on ki hey we should write a lot of comments, but if it is not adding any benefit to your code, just having good variable names, just having good function names reduces the need for comments to a majority of the degree. All right, let's move to the fourth code smell, which is a very poorly written comment. So, if you see the first function, the function name is process user, and the comment just says do something with the user data. uh, it really is pretty pretty useless, right? What is something? What is happening with the user data? It's not adding anything. Um, And then if we read the next function's comment, the function's name is check login. The argument being passed is user. This function it makes login check and return true false. Right. This is something like of course by reading it, since we have written this kind of code a lot of times, by reading we can make sense of it ki ha, this is checking and returning true false, but it's a very poorly written comment, and especially these kind of things um, will sort of keep you as a junior developer. So to move to the next level, it's important that we don't write such kind of comments. We write very professional comments. So what does it look like in this case? So the first function becomes the comment becomes processes user authentication and updates last login timestamp. So this is like a good comment. It tells you what this function is doing. The second one, okay, there's a slight indent error here. All right, let me just update it. Okay. Uh, 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 okay. Okay, I've updated it. Yeah. So the second comment becomes returns true if the user is authenticated, otherwise false. So this is like a very nicely formatted comment. All right. So we have covered one section. Let's quickly do a recap of what good code or what clean code principles tell us for comments. So I want you to spend some time on this. We'll sort of take this slide very, very slowly. We'll read it out one thing at a time. Only comment things that have business logic complexity. Business logic is something that is very particular to the use case, the app, the uh, the exact domain that you are building app in. Things like common login, connecting to the database. These are things pretty much it is common across everything. But something which has a business logic, those are the things that you can put in the comments. And I really love this particular line, and I feel you can use this whenever you are doing a pull request, or like whenever you are reviewing a pull request, or even just talking to someone about this, which is comments are an apology, it's not a requirement. Good code mostly documents itself, so like these two are sort of together. And this is something which is really um, it really makes a lot of sense once you start writing good function names and variables names itself. It reduces the need for writing comments more than 95%. If you have to write a comment, that means you did something wrong, and you're just as a way of saying sorry, you have to write a comment to explain कि भाई किया क्या है code में. So try to write self-documenting code. There's one more benefit of uh, writing self-documenting code, which is you won't run into this code smell, which is obsolete comment. Because if you're just writing good code, if your code doesn't need a comment, then you don't need to worry about updating the comment as well whenever you are updating the code. All right, cool. Let's move to the next section. The next section will talk about environment. Okay, so how do you usually build your app? Can you quickly type it down in the chat? Like, which language are you using? First type that. Are you using Python, Java, JavaScript, Golang, um, React, Angular, Vue? What language are you using? Can you just type and press enter? Okay, I see someone is using JS, TypeScript, React. All right, all right. And usually, like, how do you build your app? Just type it in the chat. Okay, someone is using C sharp. Pretty cool. ASP.NET. All right, all right. React. Okay, what is your way of building? All right, all right. Okay, so one way, like for example, let's say if you're working in Python, one of the ways is um, you install the dependencies using pip install -r requirements.txt. If you're using JavaScript, or like basically if you're using npm for your build, this would sort of amount to npm install, right? You need to sort of install the dependencies. Where someone says I create web APIs and I'm VC architecture, all right. So you would install your dependencies using npm install, and let's say you might just export some environment variables. In this case, you're exporting an environment variable, telling it to, like, what is the path of the file to be run, and then you're just firing off the run command. So these are multiple steps. um, Even if it is just two steps, like two is multiple, two is more than one. If you're doing your installing dependencies in a separate step and running it in a separate step, so this is again like a code smell. It The problem that it creates is a new developer might not know your particular steps of doing it, and just forgetting one step can lead to errors for yourself as well. And mostly the thing is it doesn't scale well for larger teams. So the whole premise or the whole point of clean code is, how do you make it easier to scale it up? How do you make it easier so that any developer could just get into your project and start making changes? The benefit of that is, like, sometimes, like, people, um, I've seen this when, because I talk to people, many I talk to many people every week, and one of the things that they say is, hey Swapnil, uh, kahin na, I want, yeah, I have created a dependency on me for my project, कि ये project में काम होगा तो मैं ही कर सकता हूँ या मैं ही कर सकती हूँ. And that is something they sort of falsely related to कि अच्छा अब तो मतलब like मेरा जरूरत हमेशा रहेगा because I am the only one who can do this project. But the problem there is, you will then always be just limited to that particular project, because if anyone else also wants to come into that project, it's going to be very hard to do that knowledge transfer from you to that particular person. So eventually you will just end up being on that project for years. Of course, like, no one else would come to it because it's so hard or it's so unmanageable all over the place. But the thing is, and what most people don't realize is that it limits your chances as well. Let's say if some another good project uh, presents an opportunity for you to jump into, your manager, he or she won't allow you to leave your current project because the project has a dependency on you. So it might seem very counterintuitive, but the more you create a dependency, that's actually bad for you. The more you are independent of any project's dependency, that hey, okay, you're working on, let's say, two projects in parallel, but someone can just come in tomorrow and then just start resume they can just resume the work from where you left off. It allows you to capitalize on good opportunities when they come, because they will always come at a particular time, right? And at that time, if you cannot jump to that project, then pretty much you're stuck on your current project only. So this kind of a like clean code mindset, this actually helps you reach that stage wherein everything is so nicely written and documented that there's no dependency on you. And that is something that will help you a lot in your career. I know thoda sa I went on a tangent. I did not plan to, but yeah, like this is the overall crux of why we're talking about these things. Like it might seem simple, one thing at a time, but you put everything together, it really, like, I'm very, like, I have a very strong opinion about it. This is really the difference between a junior and a senior developer. All right. So how do you? Okay, I see some comments. I can relate to this. Yeah, yeah. All right. So how do you fix this? You put all the build steps in one file. So in this case, you can maybe, let's say, create a file called setup.sh, or you can name it build.sh. The actual name doesn't matter, but all the steps should go in one particular file. And any developer, either you or someone new who comes in, they just run that file and it's done. All right. Let's just extend it to one more use case, which is tests require more than one step. This is actually worse than the previous one, because build to we just usually have to do once. एक बार setup कर लिया, it is up and running. Now we just make changes and it's okay. But testing is something that you do multiple times a day, and the faster your tests run, the easier that it is to set up those tests, the more frequently you will actually end up running them. And that again is correlated to good code. So same thing goes here. Let's say if there are multiple steps wherein you are, let's say, starting a database, setting some environment variables, then running tests, problems are same, which is either you might also forget a step sometimes. So again, you'll be like, okay, क्यों नहीं चल रहा है, क्यों नहीं चल रहा है? And of course, someone new who comes in, they might forget. It takes extra time and effort, and it also doesn't work well if you have like a CI/CD pipeline. When you have a pipeline and if you just have to run one file, it's just easier to set up that way. So how do we fix this? Again, same thing. The formatting or the structuring is the same. It's just that the concepts are different. So we're talking about it separately. You put everything that needs to be executed for running the test suite, and then running tests just becomes running one file. Here is the takeaway. This is just sort of trying to hit home the point that if anyone has to run multiple commands, sometimes, I've also seen people copy files manually. Okay, यहाँ से यहाँ copy करेंगे and then build होगा. Or configure settings each time they have to build the project. There's a lot of chance of human error, so it just makes onboarding harder. So rule of thumb, build should be automated and repeatable with one command. Same thing for testing. If You have to set up a database or start a service or run multiple commands before testing. It slows down development. What you will end up doing is, instead of running the test again after 30 minutes, you will say चलो ठीक है 3 घंटे बाद run करेंगे या end of the day में एक बार run कर लेंगे, and that just increases your feedback loop. uh, your feedback loops basically becomes bigger, which is not really helping. So yeah, tests should be automated and runnable with one single command. Cool. We have covered 2 out of 5 sections. Any questions, any queries, anything that you want to talk about, just put it in the chat. I'll take it up as you put it, or I'll just put it at the end. Meanwhile, we'll move to the next section, which is functions. So the first thing about functions, we'll talk about arguments. So this code smell is called output arguments. Let's see what this function is doing. The function is called calculate square. It takes in a number list, and then you're looping over that list, and for every item you are just multiplying it by itself. So basically 4 का 9 हो जाएगा, sorry 4 का 16 हो जाएगा, 3 का 9 हो जाएगा, 5 का 25 हो जाएगा. So you're just replacing a number with its square. The problem here is that it changes number in place, and as the caller of the function, if you see the below code, is a list, and then I am calling the function calculate square. The caller of the function might not expect that the array itself will be modified, and it makes it very hard to track unexpected changes. So whenever you are passing something to a function, whatever argument you are passing, try to avoid changing the argument itself. Like whatever argument you're passing, you can use that data to do whatever you want in the function, but most of the time, like of course exceptions exist for everything. um, we so these are rules, or these are sort of heuristics. They work 99% of the time. There will always be an exception for everything, but we need to know the rules so that we can break them like a pro. So knowing this is important. If there's an exception, that is something that can be handled on a case to case basis, but most of the time you should never modify the arguments passed in a function. uh, does that make sense? So how you do this here is, instead of modifying the number list itself, you return a new list. So in this particular case, you loop over the number list, yes, but you don't modify it, and you can sort of test it by um, printing out the original list again. In this case, it remains unchanged. This is a very good, like, expected behavior for any, like, if any senior developer is reading your code, this is how they feel like it should be done, or like this is how it will help you reduce your errors. So avoid modifying the arguments altogether. Treat them as a constant, treat them as final if you're coming from that world. So final mano, constant mano. That is the first thing. Yeah. Someone comments, code flow is more predictable if arguments are not modified. Very true. Like predictability, right? Predictability is the key word here. As a developer, you want to maximize predictability of your code. That is how it will help you and help others as well spend lesser time to make changes in the same code. If it is unpredictable, if it's like a toys coin toys है, या लेट्स लाइक एक डाई रोल है कि 6 आएगा तो कोड सही चलेगा, बट 1 to 5 आएगा तो कुछ भी हो सकता है. तो वैसा नहीं चाहिए. लाइक योर कोड फ्लो should be very predictable, and not modifying the arguments helps in that particular case. Also, you can call that pure function, which doesn't modify the argument. All right, let's move to the next one, which is a flag argument. So what is a flag argument? You're passing an argument which is sort of like a boolean, and based on the value of that, you are sort of branching into different logic or different flows. The problem here is, so let's read this particular code. Send message, message is urgent. If it's urgent, then we go into one flow, else we go into another flow. The just reading this function, it looks cool, right? It looks okay कि हाँ मतलब normal लग रहा है. And this is why these heuristics are important, because it helps you identify कि क्या क्या problem हो सकती है बाद में. So flag arguments से problem होता है readability में. So when you read the final two lines wherein it says send message server down comma true, send message meeting at 5 p.m. comma false. Now, without going into the function itself, I cannot predict what this function is going to do. Meeting at 5 p.m. and false, I don't know what it is. Meeting server down true, I don't know what it is. Of course, we have just read it 5 seconds back, so you can say कि अरे ये तो clearly is urgent चीज है. But imagine there are thousands of lines between the definition and where you're calling it. So when you're reading it, of course, when you hover over it from your mouse, then your editor will, show that pop-up key, what does that argument mean? That's fine. But if you're just reading the code at a glance, this particular thing hurts the readability very well, very badly, basically. Um, so this function is doing two things, just sending a normal message and sending an urgent message. And that is what it is. Introducing that flag is sort of creating that issue here. So how do we resolve it? We remove that flag from the function. We just break it down into two functions, which is, you say one is a normal send message, and then there is another function called send urgent message. Now, when you read the final two lines, send message meeting at 5 p.m., send urgent message server down. This is so clear. This is so clear. Matlab, like, just reading that, it just tells you, it gives you a good sense of what it is doing, right? So that's all about functions. So quick summary: functions should not modify arguments, and keep each function focused on a single responsibility. All right. Any doubts in this particular thing? Anything that you want to like talk about? If everything is clear, just type all clear, and we'll sort of move to the next one. Okay, I see some messages. All right, all right. What about others? We've sort of covered 3 out of 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 out of 15. Okay, so we are more than halfway there. Let's thoda speed up, but okay, we'll see. We'll wrap up in the allocated time. Okay, let's move to the next thing. I think this is sort of I think if you have attended one of my previous sessions, we covered a bunch of naming conventions there. So names, the first thing is you choose descriptive names. No I, J, K, A, B, C, nothing like that. In this case, if you say class name is A, and then X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, like what does X, Y, Z mean? It doesn't convey anything about its purpose, and it's very hard to tell from the name. If in this, in replacement of this, if you write a descriptive name, you name the class as point, just reading that, it tells you, okay, this is a x comma y point. You have your init function xy. Now xy makes sense. Okay, xy is the coordinates. And then your z function, you can rename that to sum coordinates, sum of coordinates. Now when you call this function sum coordinates from the class point, it's very, very clear what that function does. I think meaningful names is sort of like the 101 of clean code. And it is also very helpful in an interview setting. If you write IJK names like this during an interview while coding live, versus if you write better names, descriptive names, that itself shows your maturity. That like even if you're writing fast code, if you're using IJK, I might, or the interviewer might think that okay, this person knows how to code, but you know, he or she is an entry level developer. They know what to do, or they know how to do it, but pretty much they don't understand the bigger picture. Versus if you're writing good names, even if you get stuck at one or two points, the interviewer will try to help you out, because this is so rare. Like, just when they see someone write good names for variables and functions, this is a very rare thing that they see, both in interviews as well as their day-to-day work. So it sort of gives you some brownie points as well. But most of all, like, it helps. It's sort of like a one-time investment. When you're writing names, it might take 2 seconds more, 5 seconds, 10 seconds more to write a better name, but it really helps with the readability, and you reap the rewards multiple times, because you write your code once, but you read it multiple times. All right, let's talk about the next code smell, which is encodings. So encoding क्या होता है? Encoding is something. So these are two different examples. So let's read the first example. Fetch user data, and then DB connection, connect to database. Query results, DB connection, execute query, query results. So the variable names here, they contain the fact that they represent a database connection and a query result. Same. Okay, we'll go to the next example later. But in this context, this is sort of redundant, because the context and the function name already provide enough clarity. This will be better. Uh, it will be more clear in the next example, wherein the class name, the variable names, class variable names, user ID and user name, they are very simple, clear, and free. But as soon as we put the names as user ID int, names str, they encode some additional data which is sort of not relevant at all. Like, this is not helping you to uh, to add anything extra. It's just tightly coupling the implementation. In case you want to change it later, then you have to change all these things as well. So from a functional perspective, we can remove this coupling from the implementation, as long as we know, okay, user ID, this is what it stands for, username, what it stands for. The actual implementation, that is something which can be abstracted out. So the better code for here would be, in the first case, we change DB connection to just connection, query results to just results, and we remove the int and str suffixes from the class variable names. All right, does that make sense? Okay, let's move to the next one. The next one is about side effects. Names should describe side effects. So let's let's do this more interactively. So you see two functions here. Let's talk about the first function. What the function is saying, calculate interest. What is unexpectedly or hiddenly happening extra in the function. The extra thing that is happening is the transaction is being logged as well. If you see the second line, the interest is calculated by balance into rate into years. Um, but in the next line, it is being logged as well. If you see the next function, it says delete user. So the first thing, which is uh, you have your user ID, you get the user from user ID, so you got that user object, and then you're calling delete user from DB. So now you're giving the user object and you're deleting it. Fine. The extra thing that is happening here is you're sending a notification email as well, and this is sort of misleading. This is not clearly described in the function's behavior, and this is something, it's very hard, it's very easy to forget. It's very um, easy to, of course, when you have just written the function, then you will remember it. But let's say you come to this code again 2 years later, and then you call this function from somewhere, delete user. You will never guess that this is sending a notification email as well. So make sure that if your function is doing multiple things, either have your function only do one thing. That's the best thing ever. The problem there is then your functions become very, very small. So you might want to write थोड़े longer functions, but in that particular case, you should name that function in a way that it describes that side effect. So in this particular case, it just becomes, instead of calculate interest, the function name becomes calculate and log interest, and the delete user becomes delete user and notify, right? So this at least tells you, okay, this is going to happen. All right. Let's move to the takeaway here. Variable names, function names, classes should have names that clearly describe their purpose. Whenever the names are unclear or misleading, it will make code harder to understand, and it will eventually result in a bug. If not today, then 3 months down the line. Avoid encoding, which is coupling in your names. Try to abstract the implementation out of the name so that you can change things later. And like we mentioned, the last one, try to describe the side effects if applicable. Side effects can refer to any observable change that the function makes beyond just returning a value. So, for example, let's say if it is modifying a global state, then you know you should mention that in the name, or interacting with some IO, or changing any other variables. Whatever, if you read that function name and if you feel that, hey, no, this is doing much more than just this particular thing, that is not cool. Okay, someone is asking, is it fine that function names are longer? Yes, it is totally okay if the function names are long, because if you try, if there is something that you want to convey and your function name is small, then you will have to write a comment on that, right? And the thing with that is, whenever you're calling that function, then again you have to see, array kya comment mein kya hai, like what does this function do? So it's about balancing key. It should not be redundant. Like for example, let's say uh, we can write पूरा वन लाइन भी लिख सकते हैं यहाँ पे, राइट? कि कैलकुलेट इंटरेस्ट फ्रॉम rate, years, and account balance, and log the transaction, and log the transaction somewhere in the DB. Like this is like such a big name, but that is too long, right? That is too long. So we it's almost like just enough information that nothing is hidden. So in this case, as soon as we write calculate and log interest, तो we just get to know कि अच्छा calculation हो रहा है और logging भी हो रहा है. अब क्या लॉग हो रहा है, कैसे हो रहा है, एग्जैक्टली क्या पैरामीटर्स लॉग हो रहे हैं, that I can still come and see inside the function and see. But at least when I call this function, I will not forget that logging ही नहीं हो रहा है, logging हो रहा है इसमें. So that is important. Long function names are totally fine, but try to like keep it as small as possible with all the side effects mentioned. All right, let's move to the final section, which is tests. And again, like this is something which sort of most people know somewhere deep in their heart. They know कि भाई tests लिखना चाहिए, but this is one of the most common violations of clean code, which is the number of tests that people write is just too damn small. It is so low, uh, and I hope that just hearing me out will give you some motivation to do that. Yeah, someone mentions never-ending tech debts. Yeah, tech debt is always there. But again, like mastering tests, it helps you in every stage of the project. If you have a tech debt, again, it will be helpful while refactoring. It will be very helpful. Um, while adding new features, again, it will be helpful. Um, so I think I'm sort of going into a tangent of like benefits of test-driven development altogether. But let's just talk about code smells, code like heuristics that which you can use to improve your code. The first thing is insufficient tests. Here, as you can see, this only checks one condition, which is a successful login, and it does not account for failure cases such as incorrect passwords, invalid usernames, other things. So the fix here is you add more tests. You, in this case, let's say we have added a wrong password um, case, then we have added an invalid user case. Maybe we have a way to mark a particular user as like maybe you could lock the profile or mark suspicious or something. So even if the username and password are correct, we don't want that user to be able to log in, so that particular user is logged, so it should be false, like login should not be successful. So adding more tests will surely help, and this is sort of like again, like it already. This is sort of like a revision. Second thing is don't skip trivial tests. And if you see this function square n and then it is just returning n into n, and you will say this, right? This function is too simple to fail, so I don't need to test it. So uh, it looks good on the face value. The problem here is what happens if someone else modifies it, and maybe accidentally, right? They were just going through this function or just going through the whole file, and cursor यहाँ पे आया and इस टाइप पे कुछ backspace दब गया है, कोई नंबर दब गया, something just happened, हल्का सा एक प्रॉब्लम हो गया. Let's say instead of n backspace press हो गया and 3 हो गया, so instead of n squared it's returning like n cube now. So don't skip tests, as um, nowadays we also have AI to help with writing the tests. So like it's sort of very uh, nostalgic when I say ki back in our day, back in our time, we had to write everything by hand. So I think as of today you have much better options. You can leverage AI to write your test cases for you, which is amazing. So try to write test cases for even trivial logic. In this case, it would be let's say one, two ka four ho gaya, three ka nine ho gaya. We handled the zero neutral case. We handled the negative case also. So that is it. The thing to note here, or like one important thing to note, the tests one is look for the boundary conditions always. So for example, in this particular case, you have your valid or age validation check, which is you're above 18 but like below 60. And I've seen some people just test like this, which is we check in the middle of the range. So 25 check liya, 40 check liya, and done. The thing with testing is you never should stop at just the happy path. The failures is what you want to cover. So in this particular case, your edge cases are at the edges, literally. So like 18, 17, 60, 61, these are your edge cases. And like especially like off by one errors, right? Whether you did less than versus less than equal to, these are things that get introduced as bugs. So the comparison is like a bit wrong. Um, so of course, most of the time the inputs will the real world inputs will fall in the middle of the range, but like the edge cases, like I'm telling literally, this is sort of like the edge case testing, which is we're testing 1817, 1860 are your lower and upper boundaries respectively, and then 17 is just outside your lower boundary, 61 is just outside your upper boundary. So like edge cases is something that you should always have in mind. And then finally, use a coverage tool. There's no way of knowing if this a particular test covers all scenarios. Um, and without a coverage tool, it's very easy to miss out on critical test cases. So for that, every language will have its particular way of testing the coverage. For example, in Python, this is how you run the coverage tests, and it will give you a very nice summary of how many lines were covered by your test cases. And this will always give you a good ballpark estimate. I'll not say that this is 100% like this is the only correlation. If this is good, then everything is done. Not like that. But you can very clearly see that, hey, if it comes out to be something like a 70% coverage, then of course there's a lot of room to go. Um, versus if it is already a 99, maybe yeah, you've covered a bunch of cases. Cool. So here are the takeaways. And the important thing is not testing just the happy path, but also edge cases and failure scenarios to make sure your software behaves as expected in all situations. It provides you safety, and this is very underrated thing. And maybe you might relate with it, which is, let's say some code is working. You had written your code, this code, and but you wrote it in 2023. ठीक है, अभी 2025 चल रहा है. अब तुमने 2 साल पहले लिखा था, and now you are asked to make changes in it. तो एक बार तो डर लगता है. Like I'm not sure if you have gone to your old code anytime, but this is something which happens to the best of us, which is we are like यार इसको चल रहा है तो क्यों ही छेड़ना है, like चलने देते ना, उसको क्यों छेड़ना है. So whenever you want to refactor any code or make changes or optimize any old code, if that code is already under good coverage, if that code already has a lot of tests written, you can edit that code with infinite confidence. You will be like, चलो करते 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 just run one script, yeah, everything is working and you're done. Versus if there's no tests, then you will just pull your hair and just try to go through that 1,000 line file जिसमें 20 function हो सकते हैं, and then you'll be like, अच्छा कुछ unintended behavior तो नहीं हो रहा, and you're just going back and forth, and then मन में you are sort of like uh, saying bad words to someone कि अरे यार क्यों क्यों change करवा रहे हैं इसमें, like चल तो रहा है ये वो, because it's coming from a place of fear. The fear is that you make changes in one particular line, in one particular function, in one particular class, in one particular file, and something else breaks somewhere else. Like, have you have you experienced this fear कि बड़ा code base है, you make changes somewhere and like almost like a butterfly effect, कि change छोटू सा कहीं किया and you get the effect of it in a much larger way somewhere else, and it's just unexpected. So that is something which, if you're writing good tests, it provides you with that safety. So always ask yourself, am I testing values that are right at the edges? And just keep checking test coverage regularly. It will make sure you're testing critical and complex parts of the system. Whew. So with that, we've come to the reflection point, and we've covered 15 things. I'll I'll do a quick review in 1 minute. I'll just do a quick summary again in 1 minute. But before that, I want you to just close your eyes and think about like what is your one major takeaway from this session. And I want you to quickly write it down in the chat. You can write 2 words, you can write 2 lines, you can write one paragraph, whatever. Jitna, like whatever you remember, whatever is something that you will take away and start implementing in your projects, in your code, at your workplace from tomorrow onwards. Because that's the real USP of attending a session, which is you change your mind about something or you get to know something new. You actually put it in action. So what is something out of the 15 things we talked about? What is something that you still remember as of now, and which you sort of plan to put it in your work? Just quickly type it in the chat, and then we'll do a quick reflection. So we have a question from Madhushi. She asks, when is the right time to write tests? So the right time is you just wrote your logic, and before before basically committing or before putting that pull request, not pull request is a very long way, but before you commit something, you can make changes, but when you're just committing, before that, just write the test case for it. Don't wait ki you will write, let's say, 300 lines of code at one go, and then you will write all the tests for that. That is usually not the best thing to do. It's very tempting, yes, कि अरे एक साथ लिख लेंगे test, but the thing is कि the inertia becomes very high, and the kind of testing that you'll do at the end will be very limited. You will be just wanting to get over with it, कि चलो खत्म करना है बस. So from that perspective, it's just better to uh, write tests as you go. So let's say I've written 50 lines, 100 lines of code. Just stop writing more code and just write the corresponding tests for it as well. And the good thing is it will also help you refactor quickly as well. Otherwise, again, you have to hold a lot of context in your head. All right. Any other questions? Now is the time to ask. And of course, waiting for a few more reflections. What is your one major takeaway from this session? I'll quickly recap the ones that we covered. So we covered comments, inappropriate information, obsolete comment, redundant comment, poorly written comment. So a bunch of things about comments. Just only use comments when uh, absolutely needed. Regarding environment, do all the build, all the tests, just run them in one step altogether. Don't have multiple steps. Again, this might think like, if in case your project requires more than one step, that is the one thing that you can change tomorrow itself, and your future self as well as your other team members will thank you, because this compounds really fast. You just fix it once and you'll save a few seconds every time for the entire life cycle of the project. Arguments. So don't change arguments, don't change the data, don't change the values being passed as the argument. That is what we mean output arguments. And flag arguments, just try to avoid that because it just messes up with the readability. And then we covered a bunch about names, how to write better names, and uh, especially avoiding the encodings, avoiding the decoupling, and regarding tests, it's very easy to skip tests. But if you start using a tool, as soon as you start seeing some numbers, so the thing is key, it just gamifies it in your mind. And that's the thing about numbers, right? It just gamifies things, and you just want to improve that number over time. So there's a saying which is, things that get measured get improved. So just start tracking it um, from now. Okay, I see um, some reflections in the chat. I'll just quickly read it out. Okay, this. Okay, my takeaway from the session is that I tend to skip tests for trivial use cases. And so I'll try not to take it easy and cover test cases on the edges, which I haven't done seriously. Yep, yep. Again, like all of these things, like independently, uh, you will feel like skipping them. But if you just do all of them all together, you will yourself see a big difference. Like mentally, you will feel okay, array, like, my workflow has improved a lot. Um, Okay, someone has said the takeaway is use AI to generate test cases. Yeah, man. Yeah, whatever works, right? Whatever works. Uh, the output is more important. The means or how we get there, that's totally fine. Use AI if you want, but write test cases. Write. Someone says write readable code not for you but for everyone. I think this is again a very good takeaway, which is um, the all of these things don't really matter if you are the only one yourself working on that project, because you can always argue that, hey, I know everything of my code base. But as soon as you go into collaboration, you want something readable. And the problem, I'll just give you a problem. Someone, I think last week, was telling me this problem, which is key. The project's code was not readable. Like, that person just got assigned to that a new project, but the code and everything was very bad. And so what he had to do every day was, he had to ping the previous developer who was working on it. So he was pinging him in morning, afternoon, and evening. So think about that. The person who moved on from this project to the new one, that person still has to put in time for the old project, because that code is not readable. So ab readable hi nahi hai, so then again you are the one responsible, right? So always try that your dependency is reduced. Otherwise, your time is limited, right? It will just take up all your future time. Okay. Okay. Someone says, I'll propose writing more tests to my team. Unit tests that test the code. We don't write a lot of them, so we'll do that. I think that's a pretty good good outcome of this session. If you propose anything, you could also propose a checklist. So these are the heuristics that we talked about here. They are sort of like taken from this book called Clean Code by the author already, right? Robert Martin, Uncle Bob. So he has a lot of them. I've sort of picked the most important ones and condensed it in a 1 hour session so that you can do that. And just having a list of these things when you're reviewing someone else's code, that is also a very good thing to be proposed to your team's process. So that you can just say that, hey, there's nothing like this, there's nothing like this is done, this is done. So checklist is always helps. Cool. So with that, here we are at the last slide, which is slide number 42, the answer to life, universe, and everything. For future workshops, you can subscribe here. The website's URL is lu.mart/capture. And yeah, this is the first workshop we are doing. Once we sort of, you must have seen the announcement already, Rocket Careers is now Captro. So yeah, this is the first time I've written here. Get notified, subscribe at Lumar/Captro. Cool. With that, we will wrap up this session here. Thank you folks for joining in, and have a great rest of the night. Bye bye.